A kind waiter paid for an old woman's coffee, never knowing she was a billionaire looking for her. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. The morning air was crisp and carried the faint aroma of freshly baked pastries as Michael, a young waiter with a humble smile and a worn apron, navigated the narrow aisles of the bustling downtown café. Steam rose from coffee cups, and the clinking of ceramic against saucers mingled with soft chatter from early risers, creating a warm, comforting hum. Michael's eyes scanned the room, settling on an elderly woman shivering slightly near the window, her hands wrapped around a tattered coat, fingers pale from the chill. She looked lost, almost invisible amidst the hurried crowd, and yet something in her posture, the quiet dignity in her gaze, drew his attention. Without thinking twice, he approached, carrying a small tray with a hot latte and a cinnamon roll from a previous order. "Excuse me, ma'am, let me cover your coffee," he said softly, offering her the cup. Her eyes widened, a flicker of disbelief passing across her face, and she murmured a hesitant thank you. Michael's heart swelled briefly at the small act of kindness. It was nothing grand, just a warm drink on a cold morning, but the subtle relief in her shoulders made him feel a quiet satisfaction. Around them, the café continued its rhythmic pulse, the morning sunlight slicing through the windows and reflecting off the polished counter, highlighting the contrast between his modest uniform and the elegance of the space. A small stage for an everyday gesture that seemed to carry more weight than its simplicity suggested. The woman's lips curved into a gentle smile, almost shy, as she accepted the drink, and for a fleeting moment, Michael imagined her story, unaware that the ordinary morning interaction was about to ripple far beyond the cafe walls. He stepped back, adjusting the strap of his apron, watching as she took her first sip, steam curling in the cold air, and thought about the subtle power of human kindness, the way a small, thoughtful action could spark unexpected change. As the woman's eyes met his once more, there was a quiet acknowledgement, a shared understanding that sometimes, even in brief encounters, compassion could bridge worlds. And little did Michael know, this simple gesture was about to unravel a connection that would shift both their lives forever. Michael returned behind the counter, wiping his hands on a fraying towel, and tried to focus on the rhythm of orders coming in, but his mind kept drifting back to the elderly woman who had accepted his gesture with such quiet grace. The cafe was filling up now, the clatter of cups and the hiss of the espresso machine blending into a steady, almost hypnotic background, yet nothing could drown the image of her tentative smile. Michael had grown accustomed to the routine, the predictability of early mornings spent pouring coffee and serving pastries, but today felt different, as if the ordinary had somehow been touched by something extraordinary. He poured another latte, steam swirling upward in delicate spirals, and thought about how small acts of kindness could quietly shift the currents of a day, perhaps even a life. Meanwhile, the woman, whose name he still did not know, settled near the corner by the window, her coat drawn tightly around her frail frame. Her eyes followed the movements of the cafe with a mixture of curiosity and hesitancy, lingering on details others overlooked. The way the sunlight glinted off a polished spoon, the subtle aroma of roasted beans, the gentle hum of conversation. She was a striking figure in her own quiet way, an air of refinement in her posture, and the faint gleam of expensive rings peeking from beneath worn gloves, though Michael would never have guessed her status at that moment. He continued his work, occasionally stealing glances to ensure she was comfortable, adjusting a napkin or refilling the cup without drawing attention, performing these small tasks with a natural ease that came from years of attentiveness and service. Time seemed to stretch, the minutes folding gently into one another, until finally the woman looked up and caught his eye. Her gaze held a warmth that seemed to reach through the hum of the cafe, and she inclined her head slightly, a silent gesture of acknowledgement that made Michael pause, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. There was something magnetic about her presence, something that made the mundane feel suspended in a moment of connection. As he returned to the counter, he could not help but replay the brief interaction over and over, analyzing every word, every pause, every subtle nod, trying to decipher what had passed between them in the quiet language of human kindness. The morning carried on, customers coming and going, each absorbed in their own routines, oblivious to the quiet exchange that had occurred in the corner. But Michael remained acutely aware, as if the act had awakened a new attentiveness in him, a sharper sense of empathy that threaded through his interactions with everyone he served. Later, during a brief lull in the café, he stepped outside to take a breath, the chill of the morning air pressing against his cheeks, and found himself imagining the woman beyond this moment, wondering about her life, her story, the experiences that had shaped the grace he had witnessed. He felt a stirring of curiosity, a gentle pull that was more than mere intrigue. It was a sense of responsibility, the quiet hope that perhaps his simple gesture might mean more than he realized. Meanwhile, the woman gathered her belongings with deliberate care, folding her scarf and adjusting her coat, her movements precise, measured, yet touched with a softness that mirrored the moment of kindness she had received. As she left the café, Michael watched from the doorway, a sense of anticipation tightening in his chest, an unspoken awareness that this encounter was only the beginning, that there was a story unfolding just beyond the edge of the ordinary, waiting to reveal itself in ways neither of them could yet foresee. In that moment, the morning sun caught her silver hair, casting a gentle glow around her as she disappeared into the bustling street, leaving Michael with a quiet reverence for the small but profound connection that had just occurred, a seed planted in the routine of an ordinary day that promised to grow into something far greater than either of them could imagine. The next day, Michael arrived at the café earlier than usual, the streets still glistening from last night's rain, mist curling in the corners and clinging to the pavement like a thin veil. He moved with a quiet anticipation, organizing trays and arranging cups. Though his mind kept returning to the elderly woman from yesterday, replaying every nuance of her expressions, the way her fingers had curled around the cup, the subtle gratitude in her voice. Customers trickled in, the aroma of fresh espresso and toasted bagels mingling with the crisp morning air. Yet Michael felt a tension, a sense that something was about to shift, though he did not know what, and as he served a regular at the counter, his eyes scanned the entrance again, hoping for a glimpse of her familiar silhouette. Then, through the café door, she appeared, framed by the soft light of the rising sun, her steps measured and deliberate, yet there was a light in her eyes that seemed to carry a story of her own, and Michael's chest tightened slightly, the ordinary morning transforming into a scene charged with quiet suspense. She approached the counter slowly, her gaze scanning the menu briefly before settling on him, a faint smile tugging at her lips, and Michael, trying to maintain composure, offered the same gentle greeting he would to any customer, though his heart raced, betraying the calm exterior. She set her purse down, producing a small note from within, and in a voice soft but assured, asked, "Could you help me choose something warm? I am not very familiar with this café." Michael nodded, guiding her through the selections, recommending a cappuccino and a blueberry muffin, noticing the care with which she handled the menu, as if each decision carried weight beyond the simple choice of food. He prepared the order himself, arranging the cup and plate on a tray and delivering it to her table, the air between them charged with unspoken curiosity, and as she sipped the coffee, her eyes met his again, and there was a fleeting moment of recognition, a subtle spark that hinted at yesterday's encounter, without revealing its depth. Leaving Michael wondering if she remembered him, if she understood the gesture that had connected them. Over the next few minutes, they exchanged small talk, her questions polite yet probing, hinting at knowledge beyond the ordinary, and Michael found himself drawn into her presence, responding with openness, careful not to appear presumptuous, yet feeling an instinctive trust toward this woman, whose quiet dignity seemed to mirror the warmth he had offered. She laughed softly at a minor mishap with her muffin, and the sound, gentle and melodic, lingered in the café, blending with the clatter of dishes and the hum of conversation, creating a moment suspended in time. Then, as she rose to leave, she placed a crisp note on the table, a simple "thank you" inscribed elegantly, and Michael, heart-pounding, watched her walk to the door, pausing to glance back, their eyes meeting once more, an unspoken understanding passing between them, as if they both sensed that the encounter held significance beyond the ordinary. Michael returned to his duties, but the memory of her presence lingered, infusing his movements with a quiet energy, a sense of purpose, and an anticipation that this was not the end of their story. Outside, the streets hummed with the rhythm of the city, the sun climbing higher, reflecting off wet asphalt and casting long shadows. And Michael could not shake the feeling that life had quietly shifted overnight, that a thread had been woven between them, delicate but unbreakable, destined to draw them together again, in ways neither could yet predict. And as he wiped down the counter, he allowed himself a small, hopeful smile, thinking of the warmth of the cup in her hands, the grace in her eyes, and the subtle promise that their paths were intertwined, ready to unfold into a story that neither ordinary mornings nor casual gestures could contain. The following morning, Michael arrived at the café with a sense of quiet anticipation, the streets still damp from overnight rain, and the faint scent of coffee lingering in the air, the soft glow of the morning sun catching the wet pavement in shimmering reflections. He moved with his usual careful efficiency, arranging trays, wiping counters, and refilling sugar containers. Yet his thoughts were repeatedly drawn to the elderly woman from the previous day, wondering about her story, her life, and the subtle power she seemed to hold without anyone noticing. The café was coming alive with the early rush, the low hum of conversation, and the hiss of the espresso machine blending seamlessly into the background. Yet for Michael, the world had narrowed to the expectation of seeing her again, feeling an almost tangible pull toward the moment they would reconnect. As he moved between tables, balancing cups and plates, he noticed her entering through the front door, framed by the soft morning light, and moving with an elegance that contrasted with the simple, worn coat she wore, her steps measured but carrying a quiet confidence. And Michael's heart skipped a beat as he greeted her with a warm smile, offering the customary, "Good morning, how are you today?" in a tone that was casual yet laced with subtle curiosity. She returned the smile, eyes glinting with something unreadable, and responded politely, asking for a recommendation, and Michael guided her through the menu with gentle attentiveness, suggesting a chai latte and a warm croissant, noting the careful way she considered each option, the faint smile that played on her lips, and the way her hands rested lightly on the counter, betraying a familiarity with ritual yet also a distinct delicacy. And as he prepared the order with careful hands, arranging the cup and plate on a small tray, he felt the weight of the moment, understanding that this was more than a casual customer interaction, that it carried an unspoken depth that neither of them had yet fully acknowledged. Placing the tray before her, he watched as she took the first tentative sip, the steam rising gently and curling toward her face, and a subtle expression of contentment passed over her features, a fleeting acknowledgement that connected them in a quiet, profound way. And for a moment, the bustle of the café, the clatter of dishes, the background chatter, all seemed to fade into insignificance, leaving only the shared understanding of this small, meaningful interaction. She looked up from her cup, meeting Michael's gaze with a faintly knowing expression, and spoke softly, asking about his life, about the café, about the morning spent serving coffee and pastries. And Michael found himself speaking openly, describing the rhythm of his days, the satisfaction of small acts of service, and the unassuming pride in the work he performed, never revealing his personal aspirations or worries, yet sensing that she understood more than she let on, her questions measured, thoughtful, and pointed, as though she were quietly testing the sincerity behind his words. The minutes passed, interspersed with smiles and brief laughter at minor mishaps, the aroma of fresh coffee mingling with the soft morning light filtering through the windows, creating a sense of intimacy and calm, a moment suspended in the ordinary but charged with potential. And as she rose to leave, she placed a neatly folded note beside her cup, a simple "thank you" written with elegance and care. And Michael, watching her move toward the door, felt a stir of anticipation and curiosity, an unspoken promise that their encounter was only the beginning, that beneath the surface of this ordinary café morning lay the first threads of a story that would soon unfold, binding them together through kindness, subtle recognition, and the quiet power of human connection, leaving Michael standing behind the counter with a quiet smile and a sense that life had shifted slightly, imperceptibly but profoundly, as the ordinary world around them continued its rhythm, unaware of the unfolding narrative that had begun in the simple exchange of warmth and attentiveness. Michael returned to the café the following afternoon, the golden light of the late sun streaming through the windows and casting elongated shadows across the wooden floors. He moved with his usual deliberate pace, adjusting cups, sweeping crumbs from the counter, and refilling napkin holders. Yet his mind was preoccupied with the elderly woman, her presence lingering in his thoughts like a faint, persistent melody. The quiet murmur of conversation mixed with the occasional clink of silverware created a comforting rhythm, but it was overshadowed by the anticipation of seeing her again, wondering whether she would return and what significance their encounter might hold. Just as he was arranging a fresh tray of pastries, the door opened, and she stepped inside, the soft chime of the bell announcing her presence. Her steps unhurried, yet purposeful, and Michael felt a subtle thrill as he greeted her, trying to maintain the casual tone of a professional waiter, while his heart raced with curiosity and expectation. She approached the counter, her eyes scanning the menu briefly before locking on his, a faint smile hinting at recognition and an unspoken acknowledgement of the connection forged during their previous meetings. And she asked gently for a recommendation, speaking with a calm assurance that contrasted with the fragility of her frame, and Michael guided her through the choices, suggesting a lightly spiced latte and a warm almond croissant, noting how she held the menu with careful hands, fingers tracing the edge as if absorbing more than just the words printed on the page. He prepared the order himself, arranging the cup and pastry meticulously on a small tray, mindful of every detail, the aroma of freshly brewed coffee mingling with the scent of baked goods and the faint chill of the autumn air drifting in from the open door, and delivered it to her table with a quiet sense of ceremony, watching as she took the first sip, her eyes closing briefly as the warmth spread through her. And Michael felt a ripple of satisfaction, a subtle confirmation that his small act of attentiveness had resonated beyond the ordinary, forging a silent, meaningful bond. They exchanged light conversation, her questions measured and thoughtful, probing gently into his life and the rhythm of the café, and he responded candidly, describing the nuances of his daily routine, the quiet joys of serving others, the small satisfactions that came from observing a customer's contentment, all the while sensing that she perceived the authenticity behind his words, a delicate understanding that transcended the superficialities of their respective roles. As the minutes passed, the cafe's ambient noises, the hiss of the espresso machine, the rustle of newspapers, the distant footsteps of latecomers seemed to fade, leaving a space where connection and curiosity hovered, delicate and profound. And Michael could not ignore the subtle electricity of the moment, the sense that this encounter was the beginning of something larger, quietly significant. When she finally rose to leave, she placed a small, elegantly folded note beside her cup, a simple expression of gratitude that carried weight far beyond the words themselves. And Michael, watching her depart through the open door into the soft sunlight, felt a swell of anticipation and wonder, an unspoken sense that their story was only beginning, that this ordinary café, the clinking cups, the aroma of coffee, and the warmth of small kindnesses had become the stage for a narrative that would soon reveal deeper truths, opportunities, and connections, leaving him standing behind the counter, chest tight with expectation, and eyes fixed on the door through which she had vanished, carrying with him the quiet certainty that life had shifted in ways subtle but profound, and that the next chapter of their intertwined journey was waiting just around the corner. The following week, Michael found himself arriving at the café earlier than usual, the morning sun just peeking over the city rooftops, casting a soft golden light across the wet sidewalks and glinting off the metal signage above the entrance. The streets were still damp from an early drizzle, and the air carried the faint scent of rain mingled with roasted coffee beans, creating a calm and intimate atmosphere that seemed to heighten his anticipation. As he moved behind the counter, polishing the espresso machine and aligning the cups with meticulous care, his mind kept returning to the elderly woman, the quiet elegance she had carried with her, and the subtle power in her demeanor that made every ordinary gesture of his feel suddenly significant. The café began to fill slowly with the morning crowd, the low hum of conversation blending with the occasional clink of utensils and the soft hiss of the steam wand. Yet Michael's focus remained fixed on the entrance, the unspoken hope that she might appear again, lending a tangible weight to each passing moment. And then, as if on cue, the door opened, a gentle chime ringing through the space, and there she was, moving with a quiet purpose, her presence commanding attention even in the subtlety of her approach. And Michael's pulse quickened as he stepped forward with a smile, greeting her warmly and guiding her to a table near the window that caught the soft light perfectly, a space where the steam from the coffee cups seemed to form a gentle halo around her. She accepted the gesture with a gracious nod, and as Michael prepared her order, selecting the finest beans for a smooth, rich brew and arranging a freshly baked scone beside it, he noticed the way she observed the café, her gaze absorbing details he had never thought to consider, a faint smile playing across her lips, an air of quiet contemplation and awareness that suggested she was more than she appeared, and yet she made no overt indication of her identity, maintaining a modesty that only deepened Michael's curiosity and respect. Once he set the tray before her, the warmth of the coffee radiating through the cup, she took the first sip with deliberate care, closing her eyes briefly and savoring the taste. And Michael felt a subtle thrill, as if the small act of service had transcended its simplicity, becoming a bridge of unspoken understanding between them. Their conversation unfolded gradually, gentle and measured, her questions probing yet considerate, encouraging Michael to share glimpses of his daily life, the rhythm of the café, the small joys and challenges of his work. And he spoke candidly, describing the satisfaction that came from helping others, the quiet pride in serving with care, and the unassuming dignity of ordinary life, all the while sensing that she perceived the authenticity in his words, responding with warmth and attentiveness that hinted at a depth and experience beyond what she revealed. As the minutes passed, the cafe's ambient noises, the hiss of the coffee machine, the shuffle of chairs, the soft murmurs of customers seemed to recede, leaving only the intimate space created by their shared presence, a quiet tension and connection that lingered in the golden light. When she finally rose to leave, she handed him a small, elegantly folded card, the edges crisp and the handwriting precise, inscribed with a simple note of gratitude and a subtle invitation. And Michael, watching her depart into the light-dappled street, felt an intoxicating mixture of curiosity, admiration, and the quiet recognition that their encounter was evolving, that beneath the routine of a café morning lay the first threads of a profound story, one that would slowly unveil itself through small acts of kindness, attentive observation, and the gentle, unfolding revelation of her true identity, leaving him standing behind the counter, heart lifted and mind alert, aware that life had shifted in ways subtle yet irreversible, and that the next chapter of their intertwined journey was already beginning to take shape, quietly, inevitably, and beautifully. Later that week, Michael found himself closing the café, the late afternoon light streaming through the windows and painting the wooden floors in warm amber hues, the quiet settling over the space like a soft blanket after the morning rush. He wiped down the counters methodically, arranging cups and silverware with the precision of habit, yet his mind remained elsewhere, replaying the encounters with the elderly woman, the subtle grace in her movements, the quiet dignity that seemed to radiate from her very presence, and the strange, persistent feeling that these meetings were no ordinary chance. As he stacked the last tray of pastries, the door opened with a soft chime, and there she stood once more, framed by the warm light, her coat drawn snugly around her and a small satchel resting against her side, moving with a calm assurance that seemed to command attention without demanding it, and Michael felt a familiar quickening in his chest as he greeted her, his voice steady but betraying a hint of anticipation. "Good afternoon. It is so nice to see you again." She returned the greeting with a gentle smile, her eyes holding a depth of experience and something unspoken, and as she approached the counter, Michael noticed a subtle shift in her demeanor, a quiet focus, a sense of purpose that seemed to fill the air around her. And he wondered what thoughts occupied her mind, what story she carried with her into this ordinary café space that had suddenly become extraordinary. She placed an order, speaking with calm deliberation, her voice soft yet precise, asking for a special blend of tea and a freshly baked croissant, and Michael prepared it with careful attention, the steam rising from the cup, mingling with the faint scent of baking, creating a comforting cocoon that seemed to separate them from the rest of the bustling city outside. As he delivered the tray to her table near the window, she looked up, her eyes meeting his with a quiet intensity that made him pause. And in that moment, the usual boundaries between customer and waiter dissolved, replaced by a fragile connection woven through repeated encounters, shared glances, and subtle acts of kindness that spoke louder than words. They began to converse, her questions probing gently, curious about his life, his work, his perspective on the small café he ran, and Michael found himself speaking openly, describing the rhythm of his days, the small joys found in preparing coffee and pastries with care, the fleeting satisfaction of making someone's morning just a little brighter, and the way these simple moments created meaning in a world that often overlooked such quiet diligence. She listened with rapt attention, nodding occasionally, her expressions thoughtful, a small smile tugging at her lips, as if each word resonated beyond the ordinary, and Michael sensed that she was weighing more than just his responses, that she was quietly observing the authenticity of his character, the patience, the humility, and the integrity that he often took for granted. As the conversation lingered, Michael noticed the way she handled her tea, the delicate placement of her hands around the cup, the small gestures that revealed an elegance tempered by simplicity. And he realized that this encounter, like the ones before, carried a significance that transcended the mere act of serving coffee, that it was the beginning of a bridge, a connection between two worlds, one ordinary and grounded, the other layered with experience and quiet influence. When she finally rose to leave, she placed a folded card beside her cup, inscribed with a simple, elegant note of gratitude and an invitation to meet again. And Michael watched her walk to the door, the light catching her hair, the faint breeze ruffling the edge of her coat, and he felt a swell of anticipation and intrigue, a quiet understanding that their story was unfolding gradually, each encounter building upon the last, weaving a narrative of kindness, curiosity, and subtle revelation, leaving him standing behind the counter with a sense of quiet exhilaration and the undeniable knowledge that this ordinary café had become the stage for a life-changing connection that was only beginning to reveal its full depth. The following morning, Michael arrived at the café with a mixture of anticipation and nervous energy, the streets glistening from an early mist, the sunlight reflecting off puddles in soft, fragmented patterns, and the air carrying the crisp scent of autumn leaves mixed with freshly brewed coffee. As he moved behind the counter, arranging cups and polishing the espresso machine, he could not shake the thought of the elderly woman, her subtle grace and quiet confidence lingering in his mind like a gentle echo, and he wondered what had prompted her to return so consistently, each visit carrying a sense of purpose that he could not yet decipher. The café began to fill with the usual morning crowd, the hum of conversation and the occasional clatter of dishes forming a steady rhythm. Yet Michael's focus remained on the entrance, heart quickening as the door opened once more and she stepped inside, framed by the soft golden light, her coat drawn neatly around her and a small leather bag hanging gracefully from her shoulder, moving with a composed elegance that contrasted beautifully with the casual warmth of the café environment. And Michael felt a thrill of recognition and curiosity as he offered his customary greeting, voice steady, but carrying the subtle excitement of someone who sensed that today would be extraordinary. She returned the greeting with a small, knowing smile, her eyes holding a depth of experience and a subtle spark that made Michael pause. And as she approached the counter, she spoke with calm deliberation, requesting a special blend of coffee and a scone, and Michael prepared the order himself, the steam rising from the cup curling gently into the warm morning air, the aroma mingling with the scent of baking pastries and the faint chill from the open door, creating an intimate, almost sacred atmosphere between them. He delivered the tray to her table, watching as she lifted the cup to her lips, her eyes closing briefly in quiet satisfaction, and a sense of anticipation filled the space. A delicate tension born of unspoken curiosity and mutual recognition that stretched across the room, binding them in a subtle, invisible thread. As they began to converse, her questions probing gently yet thoughtfully, Michael found himself opening up, describing the rhythm of his days, the simple joys of serving others, the satisfaction of seeing a customer smile, and the quiet pride he took in his work. While she listened attentively, nodding occasionally, her expressions thoughtful and her faint smile conveying understanding beyond the surface, as if she were silently measuring the authenticity of his words and character. The minutes passed, each second steeped in the quiet intimacy of shared presence. until finally she rose to leave, placing a small, elegantly folded card beside her cup, inscribed with a note of thanks and an invitation to meet at a private location. And Michael, watching her move toward the door, felt a mixture of exhilaration and nervous anticipation, realizing that the encounters were leading to a revelation, a turning point that would bridge the gap between ordinary kindness and extraordinary opportunity. Stepping out briefly to watch her leave, the sunlight catching her silver hair and illuminating her graceful movements, Michael felt a sense of quiet reverence and excitement, knowing that this was the moment when the ordinary rhythm of the café intersected with a life-altering connection, a subtle, deliberate unfolding that would soon reveal her true identity and the extraordinary possibilities that lay ahead, leaving him standing behind the counter, heart lifted and mind alert, aware that the next chapter of their intertwined journey was about to begin in earnest, full of promise, revelation, and the quiet thrill of destiny, converging on a simple act of kindness. The following afternoon, Michael arrived at the café with a sense of quiet anticipation and heightened awareness, the early light of the sun casting warm, golden hues across the polished floors and reflecting off the window panes, carrying the faint scent of coffee and baked goods mingled with the crisp autumn air. He moved with deliberate care behind the counter, arranging cups and trays, wiping surfaces with methodical precision. Yet his thoughts were consumed by the repeated visits of the elderly woman, the quiet dignity in her posture, the warmth in her gaze, and the subtle yet unmistakable connection that had grown between them over the past week. The café filled slowly with the morning crowd, the low murmur of conversation blending with the soft hiss of the espresso machine and the occasional clink of plates. But Michael's focus remained fixed on the entrance, a gentle tension building in his chest as the door opened and she stepped inside, the soft chime announcing her presence, her movements calm, deliberate, and imbued with a quiet elegance that contrasted beautifully with the ordinary surroundings. And as he greeted her, his voice steady, yet carrying an undercurrent of anticipation, she returned a small, knowing smile, her eyes sparkling with a mixture of amusement and warmth that made his pulse quicken. She approached the counter and spoke in measured tones, asking for a simple cup of tea and a freshly baked pastry, and Michael prepared the order himself, the steam curling from the cup, the aroma filling the small space with a sense of intimacy and expectation. And when he placed the tray before her, he observed the subtle grace with which she accepted it, her eyes lifting briefly to meet his, a spark of recognition passing between them that transcended words, hinting at the secret she had kept and the significance of their repeated encounters. They began to converse quietly, her questions thoughtful and gentle, inquiring about his life, his work, the rhythm of his days. And Michael spoke openly, describing the satisfaction of serving others, the small joys found in watching a customer smile, and the quiet pride in his routine, all the while sensing her attentiveness, the subtle nods, the faint smiles, and the moments of reflection that suggested she perceived the sincerity and goodness behind his words. And he realized that each encounter had been a carefully observed test of character, a way for her to measure his integrity and kindness without revealing her true identity. As the conversation progressed, she produced a small, elegant card from her satchel and slid it across the table, revealing her name, her position as a philanthropist and billionaire, and an invitation to meet for a private discussion about a charitable project. And Michael, momentarily stunned, felt a rush of emotions, disbelief mixing with exhilaration, as he realized that the woman he had helped without thought, without expectation, had not only observed his actions but had been profoundly moved by them. Standing behind the counter, he watched as she rose, her movements composed yet imbued with an effortless grace, the sunlight catching her hair, and she paused at the door to offer a final, warm glance. And in that moment, Michael felt a quiet surge of hope and anticipation, understanding that the ordinary gestures of kindness he had extended had created a bridge to extraordinary opportunity and a profound connection. In the following days, he would meet her in more formal settings, to be introduced to initiatives that would expand his world, and slowly, through shared purpose and mutual respect, a deeper bond would form, built upon the foundation of integrity, empathy, and genuine human connection. And Michael realized that the simple act of paying for a cup of coffee, had led him to a remarkable encounter that transformed both their lives, leaving him with a profound sense of gratitude, wonder, and the quiet certainty that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness have the power to alter destinies, create meaningful relationships, and open doors to opportunities that could never have been imagined. A story that began with warmth and attentiveness, now unfolding into a life-changing journey of connection, revelation, and trust that would forever mark the ordinary café as the starting point of an extraordinary chapter in both of their lives.